Welcome to ALGINKGO, your virtual campfire talk with fellow eclectics, kindling knowledge synthesis.
I don't know if you want to see the video or if I should just
It's
turn it off.
okay. It's okay.
Okay.
I prefer to see a bit more clearly, but that's all right. I can see you well enough. So, what can I do for you?
Well, I've been watching some videos and ones with you, Leslie Terabisi, and also with Benjamin Bilal, and I found them very interesting. And I guess the most impressive thing that I saw was, I guess, the synchronicity and the collaboration between you and Benjamin Bilal. I felt like you guys had some really interesting chemistry, and it got me thinking, like, basically, I don't know how you normally do these things. I don't know if I should introduce myself or
No, I'm
just
very
sort of get to the point.
Get to the point. You can introduce yourself later. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me.
Okay. Yeah, I was just very impressed by that. And there's different ideas that you have, different ideas that Benjamin has, but I just felt like what I would really like to see from people studying the Quran, thinking about Islam and what it is, what it should be compared to what we're given by the traditionalists and the Sunnis and the Shia. If there could be not just isolated individuals, but like a kind of community from that, that would be, I think, the next step for Muslims. Because when I have read the Quran, I've found it very personally transformational, but I've also seen a lot of things that are to do with communities, and they're enjoined upon communities, and only really groups of people can carry them out. And the difficult thing is, how do you carry out a communal obligation when you don't have that community that's based in Islam? It's not based on a shared value system. You know, an example would be like, just generally, it would be like enjoining good and forbidding evil. It's very difficult to do that as an individual, but it's a lot easier and more ordered and structured when you have a group and a consensus to do that. And I feel like, you know, I was very influenced by you, very influenced by Leslie Terabisi, Sam Gerrans, a few other thinkers and researchers in this area of Islam and what you might call Quran revisionism, whatever you may call it. But I just feel like the next step for Muslims is to try and build community. And I feel like when I watched you talk with Benjamin Bilal, that's the one time where I felt like here's two thinkers that really are showing an ability to come together and work together. And I'm thinking maybe there's an opportunity there.
Yes. The synchronicity that you're referring to is your most important observation here, and what the response that Benjamin and I look for together and individually is exactly that, right? To have the student want to sort of enter in to that synchronicity. Now, what is that? Well, you see, I don't know Benjamin. He doesn't know me. We've never met face to face. This whole sort of thing just occurred. So, and we were faithful to the budding relationship just over 6 months ago. And we completed our first project and together. And now we're beginning a new phase. But if you watched us along the way here, now listen to me carefully because I'm still answering your question. But I want you to understand it from a different perspective than what people commonly think. You see that synchronicity that you witness between myself and Benjamin, and even with Brother Karim and a few others that I have interviewed, that we feed each other, you see. And this is an interdimensional communication. It's evidence of an interdimensional communication between us, the unseen realm of the angelic kingdom, if you want to call it that, whatever it is, however it is that we communicate with our Creator. And this is guidance. This is evidence of guidance. Now, Benjamin doesn't have an agenda. I don't have an agenda. And there's no sort of political motivation here. But now here's the thing I want you to take away from this first response to your query is that this synchronicity, this interaction that you see between myself and someone like Benjamin, that's not just an indication of guidance, okay, which is what the Muslims have been seeking for 1400 years. It's not just evidence of that. It is what normally took place before the manifest destiny of the white man invaded the world and began to prosper this Greco-Judeo calendar and mythology and all that sort of thing, and to paint the whole world in English, so to speak. So in the day of the prophet, for example, you could cross the Red Sea, go into Oromo territory in the African Horn, and you could sit down at any campfire and find a couple of old guys like me and Benjamin and a few others having similar conversations. It would have happened, you see, and that's how it happened. That's fitra. So when you're looking for community and you're saying, oh gosh, and you say, oh, well, maybe something like that's going to happen with, people like Dr. Omar and Benjamin. And no, we're not trying to do a political thing. We're trying to teach, and Allah is, by the facility I just explained to you, showing our students what guidance is and what it should have been. You see, because this is the sort of thing that took place during the early years in Medina, in Yathrib, you see, that when the initial government of Islam was under the Medina Constitution. That's how it is, you see. And everyone in that, there were all sorts of tribes interconnected there, and they were not all, quote unquote, Muslim, according to what we might think that term is. And they were different peoples, and they all agreed to a sort of an agreement that's going to allow them to protect each other and govern each other, and allow then the Prophet to judge between them when they arise, when issues arise that they cannot judge themselves. But that doesn't interfere with the autonomy of each tribe and each tribal chief and their own hierarchies within those tribes. That's how it's supposed to be. And God made our society this way, and the Quran confirms this. The Quran says, I could have made you all the same, but I want you to learn from each other. And what is it we want to learn from each other? Well, we want to learn how it is that Allah is manifesting himself in this other kind of human being, you see, that comes from a completely different part of the world, completely different language, and yet also, hey, they got one God. You see, there are people like that. There are groups like that. And they don't have this problem with polytheism and idolatry and all this sort of thing. No, not at all. So there are all kinds of people who are actually Muslim, who Muslims, in their ignorance, don't think are Muslims. So what you're asking for is something that was supposed to have continued to evolve and develop after the death of our prophet, because that's what he handed us. But Muslims have not, the people who think that they're Muslims have not been faithful to it. And that's what people like myself and Brother Karim and Benjamin and Brother Mahil are involved in informing those who are seeking to revive and revise Islam. Well, Islam can't be revised, it can be discovered. And we're sort of discovering what was hidden under the muck of ignorance and neglect these last 1,200 years or so. And I'm surprised as a convert, I'm surprised at even at my professional level, I'm still surprised at how much the alim that I rubbed shoulders with for years when I was teaching and a research fellow really don't know what took place in world history amongst other countries and amongst other religions and what happened to their own religion. And there are very, very obvious questions that should have been asked. And I did ask that people don't want to answer. And they never want to answer because they're not politically correct. So you're looking for community, Joshua. And that's admirable. We're all looking for that. Everyone's looking for that. But it has to be in divine order. And it has to be in an order that is where men submit to other men according to divine guidance. And that divine guidance has to be given in the terms of a leader and a Shura, you see. Now, what you see in the interaction of that synchronicity that took place over the last 6-7 months between myself and instructor Benjamin is an indication of that kind of guidance that naturally occurs in the Shura that is submitted to the will of heaven. Now, I use that phrasing because that's how it was in the Chinese court 5,000 years ago. They believed in God. They believed in the will of God. They believed that their leaders should reflect this will in the earth. There was no idolatry. There was no big preoccupation with this grand red dragon in the sky. That wasn't part of the ancient civilization. It wasn't part of the ancient belief system then. And there are many, many cultures that had this kind of approach.
Mm.
They just had different names for the same concepts, the same creature. When we say, oh, God the Creator, or the Christian says God the Father, yeah, what they mean is our source creator, which is probably the best phrase coined by Brother Benjamin. So,
yeah,
what you're looking for, you can only find locally. Okay. And so you're speaking about Hijra. Okay. Really. Because people want to say, oh, well, we're going to revise, we're going to, redo, reform Islam. No. That's like asking the ocean to resurface itself or something. you can't do that. You have to make the best of what it is that you have in hand. Okay, where you are. Because the moment you start to get in this kind of reformist thing, the Quran warns about this too. They'll be crying reform, and all the time they're just hypocrites. Or worse than hypocrites, you got ignoramuses who don't know they're hypocrites. Really mentally deficient people who are emotionally volatile. All right. The moment you bring their deficiencies up, geez, so that's why some peoples have to be Genghis Khan'd, which is what happened to the Muslims. And it happened again. Just 20 years ago, it happened again. So they haven't learned their lesson. If they haven't learned their lesson, it's because they're too proud. They're too proud to learn. The master of any discipline does not want to waste his or her time with an insincere student. Okay. And that's how divine guidance is. If you're not going to be sincere about it, you can't be sincere unless you're humble. And you can't be taught unless you're humble. So the Muslims got this big problem because they've interjected a priesthood where it never was. It never is needed. You see, it was never needed. So they've got themselves in their own imamships now as a kind of a priesthood. It just doesn't belong there, and they can't move beyond it. Until they move beyond it, there's not much you can do. If you start to have dialogue, that's why I don't have debates. I won't have debates because debates mean some sort of conflict. And the moment you get into conflict, the only thing you can establish is, well, who's more cunning in a fisticuffs than the other guy? Which one's going to win? It doesn't mean which one's correct. You can't settle that in a debate. You just, emotions get fired up, and then biases get fired up, and you go back and forth, and you wind up just punching each other. Yeah, there are debates that pretend to be polite, and you can point and give points for this and give points for that. I've done that to the university. But in the end, when you're talking about theological point mechanisms here, we're all talking about biases, you see, and they've got their biases fixed. And this is compounded ignorance. That's a major psychological problem. It can't be overcome. So, what do you do? A lot of young people come to me with the same question. It has to do with Hijra. This whole idea of reform, revisionism has to do with, returning to a primal relationship with what we imagine perhaps Adam had, whoever Adam or whatever Adam really was, because we don't know. And we want to have this guidance. The whole thing is about guidance. The whole thing is about relationship. But a man can't be an island, okay? It's too lonely and it's too great a burden to bear. You see. Well, what do I mean about that? Well, you got a couple of burdens. You got the burden of knowing that you're a bloody sinner, just like everybody else has got to sit on the toilet. And then you have the responsibility of not going back to your sin, not returning like a dog to your vomit. And that's a daily moment to moment responsibility. Now, once you decide you're going to do that, then you've got to have other people around you to keep you honest. It begins with your wife, but it doesn't end there. That's the beginning of the deed, the marriage, you see. And then it goes out into the street. Well, the marriage can't stand on its own unless it has a mirror that's going to keep it stable and consequent and responsible for itself in the community. And all of that now has been destroyed by the white man's burden and all this fragmentation of society. So there's no longer this tribal orientation. You go into any community now and you're surrounded by strangers, people who don't know each other. And that was not the case 100, 150 years ago. All right. That's never been the case in the history of world politics until the intervention of Napoleon and then this destruction of European feudal states, because it was under the feudal system where everybody got to know each other and people remained stable. There weren't these mass migrations that took place and the mixing up of strangers with strangers, unless there was some sort of terrible war. But those wars were not necessarily something that were everlasting, except in Europe. When other peoples had wars, when the Sioux had wars with the Iroquois or whatever, listen, it was over pretty quick. And a little bit of slaughter. Anyway, the point is you're surrounded by strangers and you're governed by strangers, and you can't have a community under those circumstances. So there's not very many opportunities for it. The only people who've preserved their communities intact are the true indigenous peoples who are still in the jungles or somewhere up there in the mountains someplace, and the Amish, people like the Amish and the Mennonites. All other communities have lost the integrity of their cultural glue. And that cultural glue is their concern and knowledge of each other and each other's failings and the ability to support each other in those failings, because that's what happens. That's at the center of the marriage contract as well. Support each other with your failings. Okay? You're supposed to do that. And once you learn how to do that, you keep each other responsible and you keep each other doing the best that you possibly can. So you're asking for something that very, very few people have now. So if you want it, I mean, if you want it in your life, you have to weigh your circumstances and then ask Allah to take you to the promised land of your destiny. That's a pretty good directed prayer. Please, it's pleasing all around because, hey, it's scriptural. And the entry into the promised land of your destiny, it's conditional. There's no such thing as unconditional Christian love. It's God's contracts are always conditional. If you want that promised land, you got to keep those commandments. Yeah. If you keep the commandments, all the prophets have said the same thing. If you do this, God's going to do that. If you do this, you're going to keep your autonomy. If you do this. And then when the disciples of Jesus said, well, what about that? He said, look, all the law is in these two commands. Love your neighbor as you love yourself, and love the Lord your God with all your heart and your strength and your might. All. all. That's conditional, you see. And so when you are involved with people who are genuinely, the Catholics like this idea of a vocation. You understand that by that word. You've got a sort of calling from God to do this or that, the next thing. When you're involved with people who are graced enough, blessed enough to be doing the thing that they've been called to do, the very thing that they love. All right. There's not a sacrifice involved. Don't get. There's sacrifice only involved as it comes, with any kind, the pain of any kind of suffering that one has to go through in order to become proficient at whatever the discipline is. I'm not talking about that kind of pain. You're free from that sort of thing. When you're dealing with people who know what they're doing, okay, there's no burden that they put on you. You see, they're free. You're free. You can see they're free. You're free. The synchronicity flows. It's just there. Why? Because it's natural. It's the same thing that keeps the jungle tangled up with millions and millions of species all on top of each other, but pursuing their own little independent destinies. And they're free to do that because they're following Vitra. The moment that there's human tyranny that enters when you have an intermediary between yourself and those who are, between those who want to be guided and those who are not guided, and they've become the intermediary. Then you're like, well, you're repressing their vitra, and this is causing stunted growth. So they never spiritually mature. And when you don't spiritually mature, you become a chauvinist. It's sectarianism. That's what it is. So if you want to have some sort of Islamic community, you're going to have to overcome all of those impediments, Joshua. And it's not easy to do. Matter of fact, you can't do it. That's why you have to make the prayer, just like I just said a couple minutes ago, so that Allah will allow you to enter into the promised land of your destiny, you see. And then when you enter into the promised land of your destiny, and even on the way there, you will know that you're on that path and no one and nothing can turn you away from it. And you just stick to it. And there's always light at the end of whatever that tunnel might be, you see. So when that happens, you're there, then that means you're in the right place with the right people doing the right thing at the right time. Okay. Now, who can organize that? Elon Musk? I mean, this is synchronicity. Only God can bring a constellation together like that. And it happens to those who are faithful after they have their prodigal turn, and they turn away from the world and then make that turn of repentance and tawbah and devote themselves to their destiny in the cause of Allah. It doesn't have to be anything great. You can be the best bus driver in South Detroit, but everybody will know you because that's the guy that always makes the kids feel safe when they get on the bus. All right. That might be your destiny, and that could be all it is, because you never know what God knows what we don't know. So when I'm talking about this synchronicity, you see, when you see that synchronicity, that's evidence of this grace, this hidayah grace, this Rahim grace that instructed Bilal is talking about. When you see that synchronicity, that's its proof that it exists, especially between strangers like myself and Bilal who never met eye to eye and shook hands. We don't have any other private meetings. We don't discuss anything privately. All the discussions that we've had are recorded and published. That's it, you see. So this kind of synchronicity, this flow of grace, this is what should happen in all social organizations where people have submitted themselves to Islam. And Islam is what? Making peace with yourself and God. And how do you do that? You got to repent. And you got to be sincere about it. And you can't be playing games. And the people who take over the mosques, they're playing the game of ritual. Oh, I'm better than ritual than you are. I can get better equipped than you are. I memorized more hadith than you did. Oh, please, my dad could beat your dad. This is what I mean. This is adolescent. This is not spiritual maturity. If they were spiritually mature, look, the sons of Genghis would never have destroyed Baghdad. They had plenty of time to mature by then, you see. And so this was this was indicative, you see, of their misguidance. And nobody wants to talk about this anymore. I've never heard that talked about. And most of the students that I had anything to do with when I was teaching, and they were PhD students at Islamic universities, had never heard of the reasons why Genghis did it. You see, they didn't know. This is not indicative of a community that's going to get closer to God. One of the conditions for guidance is this: you have to approach God. And when my servant approaches me, if he walks to me, I run. You see? If you're not approaching God and you're turning away from the way, and it calls for this kind of judgment, hey, you got a problem with these people. And the community that you want can't be established amongst them because they feel insecure. People who cannot leave you alone with respect to the manner and way in which you believe something. They want you to believe just like they do. They're insecure in their own faith. And they're insecure because they don't have evidence of the relationship. It's not been confirmed in them, so they have to keep on proselytizing. They're like a Christian who's got to keep on telling you about Jesus. You know, people got to keep on telling you about the Hadith, and they got to keep on telling you about Muhammad. And, please look at Mexico. Half their kids are named, half their sons are named Jesus, Jesus. And look how wonderful a country it isn't. You see, it's the same thing in Muslim countries. Half their men are named Muhammad, one way or another. You see, and how backward and ignorant they've become. And so the thing that you want to do amongst them really cannot be done. I watched Imran Hussein tried to do this in Malaysia, tried to establish a so-called Islamic community away from the cities, up in the mountains, Islamic village. For years, they collected money and never got off the ground. Not really sure what happened to the money, but the farming community just never got started. I remember seeing some big-bellied imam run out there with a shovel and a pick, and boy, he lasted about 10 minutes sweating in the hot sun. You see, so these, people are talking about something that they don't know anything about anymore. Because when you're going to establish a community living in peace with each other, like the Amish have, I keep on telling everybody the Amish are the best Muslims I know, because they've got the key, and the key to their success is not their religion. This was established by Princeton University sociologists went and studied them and the Mennonites and other utopian groups. And they determined that the reason that the Amish and the Mennonite groups were successful is because they took care of each other, not because of their belief systems. They had an organization, a social organization that actually met on a regular basis to make sure that everybody's needs were met, that nobody went to bed hungry, that nobody went to bed grieving unjustly. Okay, you understand? So it's not the religion. Islam is not the religion. Islam is a way of resolving conflicts and maintaining peace. And the biggest way you maintain peace is by making sure that you can meet each other's needs. If you can't do that, why are Muslims leaving their own countries? Because they can't meet their needs there. It's that simple, you see. All of this is just basic human understanding. So let's get back to that prayer, Joshua. I think that might be of help to you in understanding. I don't know what your circumstances are, and you can tell me later if you like. I don't really care. When there's a big question, you come like to a crossroads, and I'm talking about, really big things. The little things you can sort of tap your angel on the shoulder and say, well, what do you think about this? I talk to my angels all the time. The prayer is akin to what the Muslim tradition called istikhara, you see. When you come to a major crossroads and you're not quite sure which one, and, there's nothing wrong with seriously going to seek a vision. That's what, shamans did all over the world. Hey, I don't know what to do. I'm going to go seek a vision and find out. So they go up in the mountain and they fast and pray for a couple, 3 days, maybe a week. Then they come back down. Maybe their name is changed. Maybe their destiny has changed. Something, you see. But they went to have a talk with God. You see, that's what they did. This is Islam. That's what the Prophet was doing if he was up there in the mountain in that cave. That's what he was doing. You see, it's not, we don't have to make some big superstitious game about it. So these things are all kind of set by the wayside. Nobody's thinking about them anymore. And then we say, okay, well, it works though. I'm going to sit here and tell you on the other end of this little gadget we call a computer, internet, it works. It works just like satanic practices work. If they didn't work, the Satanists wouldn't do what they're doing, you see. The difference between approaching God the right way is intention, and the wrong way is intention. If you're approaching God for selfish reasons, that's the wrong intention. Then you're going to draw the wrong responses from the universe that he created. If you want the right reasons, you want the right intention, you want the right response, you ask God and he will respond. And you ask him pretty clearly. And so that little prayer is concentrated. Oh, Allah, take me to the destiny, you see, the promised land of my destiny. Wow, that says it all, doesn't it? It's right there, to the promised land of my destiny. Well, promised land means it's from your promise, right? So you're acknowledging, right, that he's got a promise for you, and he's going to fulfill it, and it's your destiny. It's yours. You see. So if his promised land, it can't be wrong, and if it's yours, it can't be anybody else's. And that means that if you're going to make it, you see this big smile here. It can't be anybody else's. It can only be for you. But people are too faithless to believe that if they ask, they're going to receive. And then if they ask, they're too lazy to do what's necessary to take the thing, or to go where the thing can be taken, or to remove themselves to another place where there are people who will help them to take their destiny. You see, if you're in a place where there's somebody always pulling you back down into the gutter, that they're not going to help you with your destiny. And this is not a challenge. The challenge is to kick them off your heel for good. That's the challenge. The Christians would have you say, "Oh, you don't love your brother. You got to turn the cheek." No. No, that's all this kind of false gibberish. It's misunderstanding the analogical language is used. Anyway, I hope that's of some help to you, Joshua. I probably started talking a little bit too long. I have a tendency to do that sometimes. But I think I made the point to you. It's your destiny, your promised land. And if it's a promised land, then everything you need to fulfill your destiny is going to be right there. And you're going to keep it, you see, as long as you're eligible for the promise. And that was part of the condition in the exchange. The Quran makes this very clear. It's part of the condition of the exchange that Abraham made with Allah. He said, "Well, all my children," and Allah said, "Nope, only the Muslims, only those who submit." Okay, so it doesn't mean submitting to praying 5 times a day. That's not the condition. It's not the condition at all. Anyway, I'm going to stop right now and give you room to respond.
Yeah, that is helpful. I have felt that there's a revelation that's been given to previous prophets, and it's a guidance for all mankind. But there's also each our own destiny and our own path. And the interesting thing for me about the community is finding the way in which our paths interconnect, because that's also what creates a strength, like a rope when the threads are bound together. We still have our own destiny, and we still are morally responsible for our own lives and our own decisions, but it's unmistakable when 2 people or more are brought together and a strength is found there. And I think in the past few years there's been a change in many places throughout the whole world because of what happened, where people realized what they really needed was community, and they didn't have it. And then they found themselves in a situation where they called it lockdown, which was better than calling it lock up. But what was really devastating for the people, I mean, people, if you get me on, I'll talk for a long time, but people in poor countries died from that decision. People in the Western countries, they died too, but it was more the effect it had on their mentality and their psychology, and not seeing loved ones, not seeing friends, and feeling powerless and helpless in the face of, of a very satanic, exploitative system and government. And now I see a lot of people with disparate efforts in all different areas of life who have a sense for what they want, but all have different ideas for how to get it. And what they want is that divine order. They want to be a part of a greater purpose, a greater meaning. And it's something that, some people are exploited for that. And young, impressionable people, some people have become terrorists because of that, because the person that gave them that meaning that they trusted was someone that subscribed to these whatever jihadists or whatever ideas, and they were looking for a routing, looking for a purpose, and that's where they got it. And then other people, there's a comedian in America, I recently became aware of him. His name is Owen Benjamin. He has a movement or a thing around him called Bertaria, and it's all about people homesteading and trying to be self-sufficient and trying to just have a garden and grow food. And I think a lot of people have a sense that, it's mostly Christian people. I think Owen himself, he's no theologian. He's a comedian by trade, but he seems to be a Unitarian Christian. He has an appreciation for Islamic ideas, Islamic monotheism, but they all have, it's all within our fitra that there's so much evil in the world. And if we were to simply live a simpler life, it is idealistic, but if we were to simply homestead, be self-sufficient and grow food and have relationships with our neighbors, we would be more moral people. We would be better to ourselves, and we would be better to the people around us, and would more easily live a life in tune with our own destiny and in service and in honor to God. And it's like, my thinking is, well, if there's all these people around the world and they all want the same thing, that's their heart, that's their fitra, that's what they really want. At some point, those threads, those destinies, surely it can intertwine. And the question is, well, how can you do that? I mean, it's not to be arranged by, like, as you said, it's that synchronicity is from God.
Yes.
We can't just make it, we can't just fabricate it. But at the same time, I have that awareness that it's like a lot of people in the past, like, it's been going on since the 70s with hippies, and but especially in the past 2 to 3 years, there's a lot of that feeling going around. And I think it is a time of a great opportunity. Great difficulty as well, but I really feel like a lot of people have crossed a turning point where they just want to be a better person and live a better life, and they know enough to know that this system is not going to help them do that, and this system is fundamentally evil.
Well, that calls for revolution now, doesn't it? Calls for major changes. Tell me a little bit about yourself, Joshua, if you don't mind. Where are you?
Yeah, so I'm I'm from Sydney, Australia. So I
I
was
see.
born and grew up in Sydney.
Okay. Yeah,
And yeah,
I worked on the Gold Coast in Southport, um, Australia, back in, oh gosh, that's 20 years ago. So more than 20 years ago now. Yeah.
yeah, right. I grew up here. I have traveled a fair bit. I've lived in the Netherlands and Sweden, but most of my life, uh, I've lived in Australia, in Sydney, Australia. Um, and how I've come to Islam and religion in general um, is a bit over 2 years ago. I was doing a lot of research, and it's a common thing you hear that Islam is the last thing that people take seriously. It's the last thing that people research because of such a bad reputation, unfortunately, that it has. People don't approach the Quran because they look at the people who are supposed to be the followers of it and they're dismayed.
Yeah, yes, of course.
And so they think, well, what good could be in there if this is how the people act? And they don't understand that it's not the Quran, it's the people and it's the other things that they're following. And so I read the Quran, and I took my Shahada at a local Sydney Sunni mosque, and for a few months I was a practicing sectarian Sunni Muslim, and I had the sense, very early on that it wasn't quite right, but I didn't just become, I became a theist the same time I became a Muslim. So before that I was an atheist, and so it was a massive change for me. And I said to myself, this is perhaps the point where, reason has taken me so far in my life, and it's taken me very far, and it's why so many people become trapped in themselves and their own ego and their own selfishness, because we live in a very selfish world, and it does take you very far. But I realized, well, this is as far as it can take me, and from this point forward, I'll take a leap of faith, and that's what I did. But the people there were very friendly. They seemed very sincere. I knew from what I read that, the things they were telling me, the things they were practicing did not line up. But I took a leap of faith, and I said, well, I'll trust them, and I'll try it, and I'll give it a go. And because, they have their arguments like, well, you've only read the Quran in English, or, you haven't got this experience, you haven't done this study. And so I said, okay, well, I'll go along.
Sure.
But eventually, after almost a year, I could no longer really defend or explain what I was doing, and I felt that my own individual destiny was being forgotten and unfulfilled because I felt like I was moral. Because when you take the Shahada and you do it in a group of people, it's almost like taking an oath of loyalty in an army. Like, you feel like that. You feel obligated to those people to an extent, and then they're nice to you and they give you gifts and all these sorts of things. And then it's like, then you want to back out, and then you're kafir, or if you do it publicly, there can be bad consequences. But I always had a strong sense of reason, a very strong sort of questioning thing, and I got to the point where I'm not serving God. doing this, these 5 times a day daily rituals. It's ceased to help me, and it's not a help to God. And so why am I doing it?
Yeah.
And that's when I really did a lot of research into yourself, Sam Gerrans, Hamza Abdul Malik, Leslie Terabasi, Edip Yüksel, all these, anyone that was looking at Islam in a different way, I would research them and see what they had to say, because I felt like whatever the answer is, these Sunnis, these traditionalists, they don't have it.
No, they don't.
They don't have the answer.
They're close, but they don't have the answers. It's sad. On occasion, I have a student or two who turn around and admit that they were wrong, and thank me for being so stubborn with them. You see, in the past, but you can't force these things. All right, so you see, this synchronicity, this is hidayah in action. Hidayah is not just something that represents your being led to the beginning of your path. No, it is something that it's path long. You need the hidayah on an ongoing basis, on a daily basis, and that's what it's all about. So it's about salat. Salat is about maintaining consciousness, maintaining this perspective, you see, and maintaining the balanced perspective, so you don't lose your cool. And it's something that is not easy for all of us. The religious traditions that the Muslims have taken up, these have all been designed to control the population. And it was pretty good design. It actually worked for the most part. But it was not Islamic. It's not the example that the Prophet gave us in Medina. That was a confederation, and they were not all Muslims. There were Muslims, non-Muslims, Christians, and Jews in it, and pagans as well. You see, they were all working together for self-defense. And that's where we begin, you see. Okay, so, all right, we believe in God. You don't believe in God. He thinks he believes in God. That's not important. You see, there's a big red-haired monster tribe on the other side of that mountain. They're headed this way. There are 300,000 of them, and we got to do something about it if we're going to live. All right, so it was a defense agreement. Now, when you think about this, who you're defending yourself against? Well, they're going to defend him against the pagans, the idolaters, the chief idolaters of the day in the region, in Mecca. So that means they're defending themselves against an organized form of evil. Now, the Jews could, admit that. The pagans amongst them, they could say, okay, well, we're just going to go along for the ride and see what happens. Some of the Jews probably thought the same thing. But the other tribes that were more Aramaic in nature, or more Arabic in nature, if you will, they knew that they needed to stop having these internecine wars and cross-tribal murders and all this sort of thing. So they wanted Muhammad. They saw hope in Muhammad, you see, to put that to the test. And that's the example. That confederacy is the example. Muhammad did not take control over all of the individual tribes. He only took control over their defense pact. It was not a religious thing. And they didn't all start attending, masjid on Fridays and listen to his sermons, which were never given there, you see. So anyway, listen, I've got to get on with the rest of my day here. I thank you, Joshua. Have you joined the forum? Have you? Are you there?
I believe so.
Okay.
I'm not
Well,
sure
yeah.
exactly where to start though, because it's not like the
Mm.
forms I'm used to. But I do think I'm on there.
Okay. Well, I'll look for you on there, and I'll make sure that Sister Amina refreshes your memory and maybe walks you through that process or something. And if you need to talk with me again, just let us know. All right. I look forward to getting to know you over a period of time. And thank you for joining me. And don't
Thank
hesitate
you.
to contact me again. Wassalamu
Will
alaikum
do.
wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.